You may have heard of gerrymandering in your high school civics class, but on a list of political terms you'll never hear again, it almost seems irrelevant. What you don't know is that gerrymandering has been a serious problem in our state for many years, and it's only getting worse with time. Lack of a Supreme Court decision on this issue hinders the fairness of our elections and contradicts the foundation of American democracy. Something needs to be done about gerrymandering before it's too late. For more insight on this issue, we interviewed a few prominent people in our community about gerrymandering.
Sure. My name is Jonathan Kapler, and I'm the Executive Director of the North Carolina Free Enterprise Foundation, and we're a nonpartisan nonprofit organization that does a political research and analysis on state politics in North Carolina. We don't do any candidate endorsements or any issue advocacy. We just try and provide what's hopefully broadly viewed as credible and insight analysis on North Carolina politics.
Tony McEwen, Assistant to the City Manager, City of Wilmington for Legislative and Intergovernmental Affairs.
I'm Chad Adams. I am the owner of the Big Talker FM, former county commissioner in Lee County, North Carolina, and former former vice president of the John Locke Foundation.
Sure. I'm Bob Phillips, and I am the Executive Director of Common Cause North Carolina. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit organization that advocates for reforms that are essentially strengthening democracy. And one of our big issues is focused on what we call ending gerrymandering now. So we do a lot of work in that regard in educating the public, building up grassroots support, talking to the media, and even in the legal world, filing legal challenges against the current laws we have here in North Carolina. So it is all about pushing for reforms that, in our minds, strengthen democracy.
I'm Susie Hamilton, and I'm currently the Secretary of the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources for the state of North Carolina. I'm a former legislator. I was a member of the North Carolina House of Representatives from 2011 to 2017.
Gerrymandering is the political process by which the parties in power redistrict based on a partisan advantage, usually. And the word comes from a utilization of drawing it, it's a term from the 1800s, based on like a salamander, when you can draw a district to look like anything you want to pick up the voters you want to get a certain partisan advantage.
So gerrymandering is really, I think, a little bit in the eye of the beholder. It's a practice of drawing district lines in a way that benefits one group over another.
Well, redistricting is something that is necessary per federal law. After census is taken every decade, they then have to reapportion districts across the country at both the federal and state level to ensure that roughly everyone has equal amounts of constituents, of residents within each district. And then they will also, congressional district will shift from state to state depending on how population shifts from state to state.
So gerrymandering, I guess, is some people perceive it to be kind of a perversion of the redistricting process. Redistricting has to happen after every census, every 10-year decennial census, where you're drawing new lines to ensure that there's kind of equal representation at multiple levels of government. We think of it most notably amongst our congressional districts and ensuring that one person has one vote. And that concept, but redistricting is just the process that you have to go through to draw the district lines to account for population growth and decreases in various locations across the state and country.
Gerrymandering is done by the party in power in a given state to determine where those districts are. It's been done for a very long time, but it's almost impossible to draw a district that doesn't have some kind of partisan advantage.
Gerrymandering is a term that was derived, I believe, in the 19th century by a legislator. I can't remember what state he was from. I believe his first name was Jerry, and he discovered a way to draw a district that would secure his ability to be reelected regardless, because of his policy, his party affiliation. In other words, he drew in either Democrats if he was a Democrat, or he drew in Republicans if he was a Republican. I can't remember exactly which party he was in. And the folks that took a look at it in the process said that the district itself looked like a salamander.
Redistricting is something that is set in place by law that after the census is taken every decade, there has to be a reapportionment of congressional seats, and that happens at the state level with state legislative seats as well. In that they take into account population shifts from state to state. The number of congressional districts never change, but they do get reapportioned from state to state depending on how population shifts. The difference between that and gerrymandering, I think it's tough for me to define exactly what gerrymandering is. I think it's kind of, you know it when you see it, and it depends on whether or not the way redistricting has taken place, if it benefits your particular political leanings or not. I think different legislatures around the country have been accused of using the redistricting process to benefit their own political party. And they do that in a myriad of different ways. I mean, number one, you can pack certain voters into one district, making the districts around it more in favor of your particular partisan leanings. So I think gerrymandering to me is when you use the mandated redistricting process for political advantage.
So North Carolina has a long and storied history with gerrymandering and redistricting. So it really, I think, kicked into high gear in North Carolina in the early 90s when there was an attempt by those that were drawing the district lines to draw a district that was majority-minority that would reliably elect an African-American member to Congress from North Carolina. And that took the form of this kind of serpentine district, a congressional district that stretched kind of from Charlotte all the way at that point to Durham, kind of along the I-85 corridor, and really was just kind of visibly very odd looking and did not necessarily represent a term that's frequently used in redistricting as a community of interest, other than this kind of race-based group that's kind of scattered all over communities through central North Carolina.
The current state is constantly being litigated. We are in 2018, heading into 2020, when reapportionment will be done. We are still in court trying to settle, and it is still, even as of this time, in court. It hasn't been resolved by the courts with respect to judicial redistricting or legislative redistricting or even congressional redistricting. It's going to be fought, and it's going to stay in court.
Right, so a good solution for gerrymandering or redistricting is kind of elusive, I think, and there's really a multitude of ways that different states have done this. And so some states have nonpartisan redistricting commissions, others, and they're structured in different ways. Others have it where the legislature is in total control, like in North Carolina. Others have it where the legislature is in control and the governor has a veto, just like a normal legislative process, which again is not the way that we do it in North Carolina. I think all methods have kind of their pluses and minuses, and I think what is probably the best outcome is a method that diminishes the most egregious problems associated with redistricting. And so some people think that that is a nonpartisan redistricting commission in some way, or nonpartisan staff drawing the district lines, as is done in some states. So I'm not sure what necessarily which one is the best. But I think it would be a good thing to kind of evaluate a variety of different options for a state like North Carolina, because in the context of this stuff matters. And so Iowa has a nonpartisan redistricting process that's largely staff driven, but Iowa is a very white state. It's largely rural, and it's also kind of square shaped. And so a state like North Carolina, which is large, diverse, growing, irregular shaped, and has this kind of complicated history with redistricting, I think a process like that looks intriguing, but may or may not necessarily fit our specific circumstances.
To take the process of drawing the districts out of the hands of the state legislators, the soundbite is lawmakers should not be drawing their own districts. Lawmakers should not be choosing their own voters. It should be the other way around. Voters should choose their elected representatives. Currently, as I had mentioned before,
Well, there's been a number of different states, Arizona being one of them, I believe Florida is another, where they have independent redistricting commissions. And, you know, I think that's probably the future. I think one of the biggest problems is, you know, if your party just came into power and you for the first time had the opportunity to control redistricting, you're not going to all of a sudden give that up. And if you're in power, you're not going to necessarily want to give it up for the next round of redistricting. So I think what the future holds is I think there's a growing trend where the public is calling for an independent redistricting commission, and I don't think that commission would ever be truly independent, but I think it certainly could be a lot more independent than the way we have our processes set up today. So you have the independent redistricting commission, and B, I think oftentimes what you see is that the party in power will agree to move forward legislation that calls for a change in how redistricting is done, but they will post-date it maybe 20 years from now to allow themselves one additional kind of bite at the apple, if you will.
I think there is an easy solution. I think that's what voters ultimately determine. If the good thing about this is when it goes too far, voters tend to let their opinions be known if it matters to them. So there's a lot of people that want a nonpartisan redistricting commission. It's very hard to find people that don't have opinions about this in the public, and so I don't know that that's a solution. I don't know that there is a solution, but the country moves forward based on the way it's been done. Maybe that's good, maybe that's bad, but what does important, and what I wish more, the real solution is having people that ran for office that believe in things rather than just being statisticians that go to people's opinions. Your generation and beyond will be dealing with this. I think that you can write very good algorithms that make districts more balanced. I think there's a way, but even in so doing, there will be partisans on both sides that will allege that the algorithm-driven and drawn districts have some kind of advantage. In North Carolina, there's a large racial contingent issue. How do you separate race when drawing a district versus partisan when people of a particular race tend to lean in one direction more than another?
The United States Supreme Court will ultimately have to make a decision on how redistricting is handled in the country in order to preserve one man, one vote. If we're allowing legislators on either side of the aisle to draw districts where their elections are guaranteed, you've effectively canceled the vote cast by the other side. And so for that reason, it's not, it's in the long term, the precision with which we can do it now is very bad for our democracy as a whole.
I think at this point, at this moment, we are all kind of waiting for the Supreme Court to kind of give us some specific guidance, especially as it relates to the partisanship issue, some workable standard for how to define what is an okay amount of partisanship to involve in the drawing of districts and what is not. And I think it's tough. It's 2018. These districts are drawn based on 2010 data. They were drawn in 2000. Some of the legislative districts were originally drawn in 2011. The congressional districts were originally drawn in 2011. They were redrawn in 2016. Our legislative districts were by and large redrawn in 2017. And so we basically do a census, we redistrict, and then we litigate for 10 years. And then we do a census, we redistrict, and then we litigate for 10 years. And so it's kind of this hamster wheel that we're on in North Carolina. And it would be helpful if the courts, the Supreme Court specifically, gave more specific or workable guidance for district drawers, so that we didn't necessarily have to get caught up in this many years long or really decade long process every time we do redistricting. Unfortunately, it's kind of become part of our political culture in the state of North Carolina to do it this way. And you can understand why, because the way in which these districts are drawn very much has an influence over who is elected and therefore who wields power over the state of North Carolina.